And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fornelli. That's Bud Elliott. That's Danny Cannell. I'm Chip Patterson. We are winding down our win totals. So if you have not gotten a chance to listen to any of our previous win totals episodes, we're talking the ACC, Pac-12, Big 10, Big 12, Notre Dame, BYU, and some choice group of 5 selections from the squad. All of it is available in the feed. It is a great way to get ready for the season. And now it is our final week. We will do the SEC East today. We will do the SEC West later. And then finally, just to get you a little bit ready for the rhythm of the season as it approaches, on Thursday, it will be our first episode of Locks. It will be the win totals lock. So we've given you all these different picks, but sometimes we say, we're not my most confident pick, or I really like this pick. Well, we got to whittle it down. You've got to have your card ready. Win totals locks coming up at the end of the week. Very excited about all of that. We got 7 teams here to tackle. Gentlemen, are y'all ready to count them up?
Let's do it.
As much as I think it's the under is a safe play, like I can't even
count them up. Count them up. How many games y'all gonna win this fall?
I can't fathom 8 wins.
How many games y'all gonna win this fall?
I just can't. I don't see it. It's not on there. It's not the schedule I'm looking at. Unless there's another schedule somewhere.
Should have worn my Georgia t-shirt, a gift from Tom Fornelli when we were Georgia Bulldogs podcast. We haven't really declared one way or another how we feel about the dogs. This will certainly be instructive.
It's time to tip our hands.
Yeah, over under win total at Caesar Sportsbook at 10.5. The over -130, the under +110. The excitement about Georgia in part comes from the fact that we get such an awesome game at the start of the season. Neutral site game against Clemson in Charlotte. Clemson very comfortable in Charlotte, but Georgia not too far. I expect that to be, it is a sellout. I expect it to be somewhat of a 50-50 split, a great kind of atmosphere there. The rest of the non-con, you got UAB, Charleston Southern, and Georgia Tech for some good old-fashioned hate. The draw from the West, Arkansas at home, Auburn on the road. And I guess I want to start this. We've got some news from Georgia as Eric Gilbert has left the team for personal reasons. So if that has influenced your debate or influenced your decision at all, definitely let us know. Which way are we going to stand on the Bulldogs sitting at 10.5?
I'll start. I'm going under, but it's not a confident under. I don't really feel confident on either side of this total, honestly, because it's like that first game of the year, I kind of get the sense that if Georgia beats Clemson in the opener, it's probably going over. If they don't, it's probably going under, just because while the rest of the schedule really isn't super difficult. Like they get Florida at the neutral field as they always do, but I don't know what Florida is going to look like exactly. We'll get more to that later in the show, obviously, but I just feel like looking at this schedule with road games at Auburn, with that Florida game on a neutral site, and with that Clemson game, there's a very realistic chance for 2 losses on the schedule. I think that this is a Georgia team that will be better than last year with JT Daniels playing at quarterback all season long, but we've seen injuries on offense to George Pickens. We've got the Eric Gilbert situation. We don't know what his status is going to be going into the year. So there are some question marks, although I do think they are talented on offense at the receiver position, at the running back position, and on the offensive line. And defensively, they're very good. So when I talk about concerns on this Georgia team, they're the kind of concerns that are like, they might only be 10-2 instead of 11-1. So my numbers push me slightly to the under here, but I don't really have an exceptionally strong feel on either side.
So it's the quarterback's job to pump up the rest of his unit, right? So when JT Daniels is walking around at SEC media days and at all preseason media availability, and he's just reading off the list of skill position players in the wide receiver and running back position like it's a grocery list, and talking about how much confidence he has in each one of these players to be able to go out and deliver, that they've got a full understanding of the scheme, that all the work they've put in at the end of last year and throughout the offseason has made him really excited about what's going to happen. I don't think that's all like JT Daniels fabrication. And I think that I hear him, express that kind of confidence. And I take some notes that we really might see that small sample size from the end of the year expanded in a big way. Gilbert's loss could be very significant because he's such a high ceiling talent, But even, I mentioned this in the group chat, even when he was going to be going to Florida, not Georgia, I still thought that this was going to be an 11-1 Georgia team. My big question that I have on my notepad is, where are the tough road games? Because Clemson's a neutral, Florida's a neutral, and where else are you going to be really concerned about Georgia going without it being just a massive disappointment? So minus 130, I got to lay a little bit, but I'm on the over here.
So my numbers say under very slightly here, but we got some good iTunes reviews that said, hey, like the win totals pods are supposed to be more about reviewing the conference. So I'm not going to talk about my lines quite as much. I think Chip brought a really good point up about where the tough road games. I would ID Missouri and Kentucky as teams 3 and 4 in the SEC East for this season, and both of them have to come to Sanford Stadium, right? As far as the games that are quote unquote losable, like maybe at Tennessee, maybe at Georgia Tech, maybe at Auburn, but I really don't feel, and maybe Auburn fans will be mad that I put them in the same category there
as Georgia Tech,
and Tennessee.
Probably deservedly so.
Yeah, sure, I would agree, but like those games aren't like 100%, 95% lock type games to me. They're more high 80s, I would say. Maybe Auburn high 70s. There are some concerns I have about this team, though. I'm going to bet the over. Probably not hard. I already have Georgia for the Natty at 10-1, so I feel nice about that number locked in. But they already had their center go down. We'll see if Cedric Van Pan is going to handle him there. I'm a believer in the offensive improvement and a believer in JT Daniels, but I will note that 3 of the 4 teams he played last year when he started to light it up were either really bad defenses or defenses that were absolutely gutted in the case of a good Mississippi State defense that had a bunch of guys out. And so you have to have, I guess, some question there. Like, is he going to do it better against the better defenses? Against Cincinnati, he struggled a little bit. And then he also had some good throws in that game. Arik Gilbert is a question because they were playing him at receiver, and they already lost George Pickens. I do think they have dudes on this team. Marcus Roseme is a guy I've liked a lot out of high school. Apparently, he's come back very strong. Offensive tackle, maybe a little bit of a question. Is it Broderick Jones? If not, I guess we'll see. But then I think about some, and look, I think secondary is a bit of a question too. They lose Tyreek Stevenson to Miami, but they get the stud from West Virginia to transfer in. I just think Georgia has a pass rush this year, right? When I talk to the guys who coach at Florida State, and they tell me, hey, Jermaine Johnson's the best player on this team. Jermaine Johnson was a backup at Georgia and was not going to start. So I think they might really have some like dudes up front this year who can overwhelm most of the teams they play. So I don't think there's a ton of value in this. For the show, I will go ahead and go with the over.
So I think George is going to be boom or bust. And that's where I like Bud's like 10-1, take him to win the Natty. I would lean more towards the bust just because I'm a little more skeptical of JT Daniels. Like you mentioned, he's the caliber of competition he's played against due to the uncertainty, and Georgia fans can be a hard time because when they, June 1st hits and they get Darion Kendrick and they get Gilbert, it's like, oh, Kirby's amassed more talent again. And I was like, sometimes you got to be careful with that talent that comes in. There could be risk that comes with it. Some of that risk we're seeing unfold. So I was curious to see what changed June 1st as far as the odds makers. Win total didn't change. And the line against Clemson didn't change. It's been pretty, it's pretty steady there at 3.5 the entire time before they signed those two and after. Well, guess what? Last couple days, we find out more news about Gilbert. Does anything change? Nope. Still at 3.5. Win total still at 10.5. I want so bad to take the under, but man, and this goes to Bud's comment. I think their backups could roll up and get 11 wins probably. I mean, it's just the schedule is a joke, which is kind of funny because all we do is talk about the gauntlet of the SEC. And this is one of the easier schedules in the country. And Clemson is not easy. Georgia's not or Florida, the Florida-Georgia game will not be easy. And I think that's the one. So if you go under, I think you have to make the assumption they're losing to Clemson and you have to assume they're losing to Florida. If you don't, if they burn you on one of those games, where's the other loss going to come from? Like I don't know. And
for me,
what?
Honestly, I feel the same way like you guys are feeling about the amount of talent on this team and how much they're better than it. I have to factor in the Kirby Smart factor in that. I just feel like they're going to screw up somewhere. Like I have to put that in play. It's like I feel like they could beat Clemson and still lose twice. You know what I mean? Yep. It's just one of those things for me. It's like we were talking the other day when we were doing the Big Ten about the Pat Fitzgerald factor. This one goes the other way. It's like, there's room for a mistake or some late game questionable decisions here.
So you're saying like the South Carolina game. Like remember that Georgia-South Carolina game?
2 years ago at home. It was in Athens and they lost. So like there could be a slip up in there. I'm going to go with Tom. I'm going to go with the boomer bust. I'm going to say I'm not buying into the hype. Like typically I will try to buy low and sell high. And I think the hype around Georgia, the expectation of this is their year, I just think it's a little bit too much. So I'm going to take the under.
By the way, I mean,
I think 10-2 though is probably a likely outcome.
Do you think? First of all, by the way, Danny was talking. I had him as over on the sheet, so I need to make sure I put that in there correctly. There's no way in hell I would ever bet this,
right?
No,
because like to me, this is. Do you like this team? Yes or no. If you really like them, bet them against Clemson. If you don't, bet Clemson. I just don't think there's really much of a why am I going to wait 14 weeks to get my money back on something that has a pretty decent shot of being decided in week 1, especially if you like the over. If you like the over, take dogs on the money line and get your cash like day after Labor Day.
And I think you've got like the best bet that's possible on Georgia this year. I think the best bet on Georgia is that 10-1 to win a national title. I got one at like 9-1 a couple months ago. So it's like, that's for me, my preseason future on Georgia. That's it. Cause I feel like that's great value. There's no value on this win total that I could really find.
Agreed.
Go Dogs.
How many games are going to win this fall?
The Florida Gators sitting at a round 9.0 at the Caesar Sportsbook. Over is plus 105, under at minus 125. The non-con goes, hey, what's up, Willie? Florida Atlantic, USF, Samford, and Florida State. The West draw is tough. You've got your LSU game that you get every year. That's going to be in Baton Rouge, and you welcome Alabama to the Swamp. So with the Florida Gators sitting on a round 9.0, we mentioned the Georgia game is going to be a neutral. How are we feeling about Dan Mullen, Emory Jones, and some moving pieces on the defensive side of the ball? I think that there's a lot of intrigue about Florida. I would say I've got more intrigue than confidence, but I'll let somebody else come and take first stab here.
Give me the over.
Are you confident about it?
Yeah.
I'm on the over.
I'm not saying it's going to make the locks pod,
right?
But like Dan Mullen is one of those coaches, along with Pat Fitzgerald, that have a tremendous record of outperforming their Vegas win totals. You do lose Kyle Trask, which I think is a big deal. You also lose, Pitts, and you lose Kadarius Toney, which could also be big deals. However, the backup plan is essentially going back to the offense that Dan Mullen is extremely comfortable running, having done so for about a decade, plus really, back to when he was Urban Meyer's OC with Utah, which is that sort of spread option, mobile quarterback stuff. They have 2 QBs who I think actually the odds of Dan Mullen not getting one of Jones or Richardson to play well, I think is not a bet that I want to take. I don't necessarily love their skill core on the outside. They got a lot of unproven guys. They have some dudes who are tantalizing, potential wise, like Justin Shorter, but can he run routes other than bubble screens? Maybe so. If he can, that offense is going to really take off. But like, there's a reason he left Penn State, and they utilized him in a pretty limited, albeit occasionally explosive role at Florida. I think the offensive line will be better. Not that it's crazy talented, but I feel like they're pretty good there. Defensive line, I think, is something that really could be pretty damn good, and one of the better ones in the SEC. Secondary, I think, is the question. They lost Hill to the torn ACL for the year, and there are some opponents on the schedule who could take advantage of that. But in looking at it,
Alabama, LSU, like you find them pretty quick.
Right, but the number is 9. So I think in everybody's numbers here, and hey, we're going to talk numbers for a second. 9 comes up a whole hell of a lot for me. I think that your chance of getting your money back on this is pretty solid. I just think 10-2 is more likely than 8-4 here. You know, I think they have relatively guaranteed wins: Samford, Vandy, FAU, at USF, South Carolina, FSU, Tennessee. Right at Missouri, at Kentucky are certainly potential slip-up spots, as is at LSU, and then Georgia. You know, Georgia, Bama. But I don't think it's all that crazy to think they can go 2-1 against at Missouri, at Kentucky, at LSU, and then lose Georgia, Alabama to hit 10-2. If they're going to go 8-4, I mean, they're losing Bama, Georgia, and they're also losing 2 of 3 at Missouri, at Kentucky, at LSU. Something really wrong happened there. So go ahead and give me the over.
I'm right there with you. I've got pushed over in the notes. I think 9-3 comes up a lot. I am. We'll get to it, but I'm more intimidated by Missouri than I am by Kentucky in that split. And I think that if you just want to make it easy on yourself, you can just imagine Alabama, Georgia, at LSU. Like, there's your 3 losses. And even if this is a team that is outperforming its win total expectation, then it's probably going to win those other games. So I'm right there with you. I'm on the over. And I'll say that while I absolutely do not believe that he is going to be Kyle Pitts because he is an entirely different player, I think Kamar Gamble has a good year. And I feel like there's a little bit of, they're trying to hype him up because you're taking over for a guy who is a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. But, like you mentioned, in terms of all those different skill position players, you've got like Xavier Henderson, Whittemore. Like, I feel like you got some 6'3", 6'4" guys. Then you've got some 6-foot guys that are a little bit shifty. Dan Mullen's done a good job of being able to put those different toys in the right places in important times in the drive, third down, red zone situations, being able to find matchups. And that's why Dan Mullen is regarded as, one of the top offensive minds in college football right now. So I think 9-3 is a likely outcome, but I'm with you, bud. I'm going over.
Over. I mean, you guys have gone over a lot of the points for me. I'm pretty much in the same area. Like, I think Alabama, that's a loss. And then I think it's really going to be down to versus Georgia in Jacksonville and at LSU. Those 2 games with the bye in between. It's like, if they could split those games, then I think that we're pretty much very solid over. If they don't, then I feel like we're probably going to push, although we could get to an 8-4 depending on how things go at the very end of the season with a couple games at Mizzou and Florida State. But I just think that this is still going to be a very good Florida team. And I know that they're losing Kyle Trask and that they're losing Kyle Pitts, and they lose a lot, but I do think this is a talented team. And I do think, like you mentioned at the very top, but with Dan Mullen, I think that they have a coach who has proven everywhere he's been that he's able to get the most out of the talent that he has, and he's even able to get a little bit more sometimes than the talent that he has. So that gives me more optimism for this team going on a weekly basis against the teams that it's going to be facing on this schedule to be one of the better teams in the country. Like, Florida strikes me as a top 10 team this year. And while I think 9-3 is the most likely outcome, I do definitely have 10-2 being ahead of 8-4. So when I look at the Gators, I look at the schedule, I look at this total, I'm more optimistic about them having a double-digit win, kind of win the division season, compete for an SEC title, than being just kind of a run of the mill for Florida 8-4.
They were great last year, right? How were they? 8-4. They were awesome. Maybe the most overrated 8-4 team we've seen in the history of football, because we talk about them like they were right there with Alabama, and they were in that game. And I get their losses were really tough. I agree with a lot of what you guys said. I got to take the under. I'm going to be a contrarian here. I'm going to tell you why. Because we all agree Alabama's a loss, right?
Yes.
Do we agree? So I think the LSU game is really tricky. I don't think they lose to Kentucky. They've 31 straight against Kentucky. They lost one, and they're going to probably start another 31 in a row. They're at a different tier than them. But I think the LSU game in Baton Rouge is going to be tricky for them. I think that's a potential loss. If they lose that one, I'm celebrating my victory already, because I think they lose to Georgia. And then what do we see? The mentality of this program that comes from their head coach. Once we're out of it, like, what's there left to play for? He didn't even like Dan Mullen didn't even blink when nobody played against Oklahoma. He's like, we're already on to next year. I think after the Georgia game, they might be on to next year. And it's hard to peg one. I would say Missouri, who they're 2-2 against since Missouri's entered the SEC. I think they're 5-5 historically. I think that's a slip-up game for them where they mail it in. So I'm going to take the under. I do think 9-3 is probably the more likely outcome, but I'm having a really hard time seeing this team as 10-2. You know, like I don't see 10-2 either. So I'm going to kind of take some value here and take the under.
So like when I think about, because I didn't mention anything about Florida's defense, and I think the difference between Florida and Georgia, you can look at the defense because for Florida, there's like one player at each level that I'm excited about. Like up on the front, it's Cox. You know, at the linebacker position, it's Miller, and it's Elam on the back end. But then I'm just not as excited about the rest of those. Where you look at Georgia's defense and outside of the secondary, particularly in the front, you go to the second line, and there's still guys that I'm excited about. So without a doubt, a tear down from there. But I like it, Danny. Going contrarian.
Count them up.
That brings us to the Kentucky Wildcats, one of two teams in the division with a round number of 7.0. The over is at -150 at Caesar Sportsbook, under at +130. The non-con is alphabet soup. You go ULM, UTC, NMSU, and then we finish at Louisville. That looks like 3-1 at worst. The West draw at Mississippi State. Then they welcome LSU to Lexington. Which this is an interesting year and an interesting time. We just had, as we're sitting here recording on Monday, Joey Gatewood just left the program. You know, we're looking at, as something that Bud has mentioned a lot on this show, some changeover in offensive philosophy. So how do we think it works out as it's put into place on the field for the Wildcats in 2021?
I have no idea. Like, I was texting a little bit about this with you guys yesterday in the group chat. Like, this is one of the more confusing teams for me as far as trying to figure out what it's going to look like and what it's going to do. Because as you mentioned, they just announced that Will Levis will be their starting quarterback. They're changing their philosophy on offense. Levis said at the time when he left Penn State that one of the reasons he wanted to get out of Penn State was that he wanted to go somewhere where they viewed him as a QB who could run instead of a running QB. So that gives you somewhat of an inclination of what Kentucky's plans might be for the position. It's just, I'm also always been of the opinion where it's like, I felt like Levis was the best quarterback at Penn State, but in the back of my mind, it's like, well, if you're right, then shouldn't he have beaten out Sean Clifford by now? And he never did. So I don't know what to expect from Levis. I don't know what to expect from Kentucky's offense. I know that they're going to be tough. I know defensively, they're going to be just, you know, they're going to be a pain in your butt. I know that they're going to get after you. I think that offensively, they'll probably be more conservative than they are, you know, straight up, let's air it out and throw the ball all over the place. But I don't know if they're going to be as kind of like 3 yards in a cloud of dusty as they've been forced to be in recent times. So it's like, I go through this and I go through the schedule. It's like, it's hard to know what's going to happen with this team. I think 7-5, which is where the number is probably the most likely outcome. But I do have concerns, particularly with there's that stretch that starts in October where they go Florida, LSU, and at Georgia. It's a really tough 3 games to have before your bye. Like, I would love to have my bye before those games. And the end of the season, things get a little more easy, but it's just, if they're beaten up after those 3 games, if they're in bad shape, the season could be one of those positions where, you know, the season starts to slip away from you. It could go bad down the stretch in games that they should be winning. So I'm on 7-5. If I have to take a direction though, and again, 7-5, far and away the most likely outcome in my mind, I think 6-6 is more likely than 8-4. So I have to give a slight lean to the under.
So I don't know that 6-6 is more likely than 8-4, but I do know that the juice on the over here is -$1.50, and the juice to the under is +$1.30. And so that's not a coin flip. You know what I mean? That like, you need to be 60% to break even on -150. You need to be what, 40? Was it like 43%?
44-ish, yeah.
Yeah. So like, for me, I'm also going to join Tom with the under here. I have, look, they kind of traded in below average to try to chase greatness. But there's no guarantee this passing game will actually work. This is the first year this team is actually trying to pass the ball. Now, you get Wan'Dale Robinson as a transfer. You get Dare Rosenthal as a transfer. We already talked about the QB. But there's no guarantee Liam Cohen's offense will actually work here. It could. Defensively, too, like they slipped a little bit last year. I mean, they were playing really good defense under Mark Stoops for a while. Last year they fell outside the top 40 in SP+. And I think FPI had them, fairly similar. Tom, I assume you didn't have them like a top 25 defense still in your stuff. So, but yet, like, they lose some pass rushers. We'll see what happens there. They also lose both their top corners. I could see this team. They're definitely not going to miss a bowl, right? Because to me, they're just like New Mexico State, which was really, really bad. UTC, ULM, Vandy. Is that Vandy out south? Is that at South Carolina? Is that 2 guaranteed dubs?
No,
I don't think it's guaranteed. I mean, like, is the most likely outcome 2-0? I think so, but it's not like necessarily more likely than everything else combined. They could go 1-1 either way. 0-2 is obviously pretty unlikely there, in my opinion. But at Louisville, they could lose. Tennessee at home, I don't think Kentucky is so good that like Tennessee at home is a slam dunk. Missouri at home, kind of coin flippy. Go ahead and give me the under here. I think that what Stoops did is very rational. I just don't know that it's guaranteed to work. And at this point, the price has kind of gotten away. Like if you think about what this opened at, it opened at 6.5 minus $1.67.
Mm-hmm.
So now we've moved to 7 minus $1.50. So we've only come down 17 cents, and but we've gone up a half win. The price of a half win ain't 17 cents, guys. Like the market has beat up on this pretty hard. Give me the under.
I'm going to take the over. And it's not a bet I would recommend for all the reasons Bud just laid out as far as how expensive it is to take the over. But for the purposes of our podcast here, and at the end of the year, looking back, saying who had more wins, who had more overs, who had more unders, I'm going to take the over for that one. So I think there's an interesting thing that's unfolding, and it's in the SEC, and I think it's in all of college football, is we're seeing the haves and the have-nots and the have-nots. And really the haves, the richest teams are like the 5 or 6 programs, maybe 7 or 8 if you want to go there. But underneath that, I think there's more parity maybe than there's ever been before. And I think Kentucky's a good example of that. Kentucky was an automatic W for every team in the SEC for a long time. And I think Stoops has actually elevated the program to a place where they're recruiting top 40 classes. They've been way more competitive. They've been able to break the streak against Florida. They've been able to have some nice wins for the program. And I actually think, and I love Eddie Gran. I think he's a very respectable coach. And I think he did – Lynn Bowden, when he was a receiver playing quarterback, was maybe one of the more masterful offensive game plans we've seen to get a receiver to put up numbers like he did. But over the course of the last 5 years, their passing offense has averaged 113th. So it can't get much worse. I think this is a league, too, where in a game, not a league, but a game now where you have to be able to pass the ball if you want to stay competitive in games. So I actually like the changes that they've made. I'm going to take the over. I just think it's hard to see a 6-6 team. It wouldn't surprise me. I wouldn't recommend this bet, but I'm going to take the over.
Danny, can I?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chip.
I'm on the under. I think that at Mississippi State is tricky. You could go 0-2 against the West for division losses. I can really quickly give you Florida, Georgia, and Missouri. I'll have more notes on that Missouri pick here in just a little bit. And if at Louisville at the end of the season ends up being an L, that's 6-6. I agree with you. It's awesome that we are debating whether Kentucky football is going to be 6-6 or 8-4, and that we've got picks on each side of this. So you can compliment the program and you can be interested in the changes that are happening. But as I'm looking at this right now, I think that it is not as much me being down on Kentucky as me just feeling like some of these other teams are in a little bit of a better position. So give me the under 7 as well.
So the one thing I want to bring up here, and I totally agree. Yes, it would be very hard for their passing game to get worse. I think there's kind of a similar thing going on at FSU. Danny, we were talking about this last night on Nolecast. It's like if you go with Mackenzie Milton, how much do you sacrifice in the efficiency of the run game? You know, Kentucky's run game has been great, and or at least relative to their expectations. They've had good offensive line play. Chris Rodriguez is a really good back, but how much of it was because they were playing essentially a running back at quarterback in Terry Wilson or Lynn Bowden or a couple other guys for him? Even Joey Gatewood, you know, to an extent, is not a great thrower. He's more of like a battering ram type. How good is this run game if you know, with Will in there? We don't know. It's not that he can't move. It's just he's not somebody that really is going to scare the defense running. Like the increase in efficiency in the pass game had better, you know, offset the decrease in efficiency in the run game if there is one. You know, and I don't know. Like their leading receiver last year had 473 yards. Nobody else had more than 200. So there's some growth there.
How many games are going to win this fall?
Coming up on the other side, we turn our attention to the Alpha Nerd and some first-year head coaches at Tennessee, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt next. Hey, Cover 3 listeners, I wanted to let you know about what's on CBS Sports HQ. As always, CBS Sports HQ is the network to start your sports news day at 8 a.m. Eastern with Morning Buzz. It's an hour of highlights, news, and all the days need to know. Then you can come back later, or just leave us on all day, at 6 p.m., where we break down all the night's action and release dozens of picks from the best analysts and cappers in the sports world. Now, how do you watch CBS Sports HQ? It's easy. Go to your Roku, Apple TV, Fire TV, or really any connected TVs and look for that CBS Sports app. Fire up the CBS Sports app and check out HQ. It is the only 24/7 free sports streaming network. We'll be on a little bit later today. Jam-packed, 2 blocks, AP Top 25, overrated, underrated, overrated, underrated. You know how we do. CBSSportsHQ.com on your desktop, CBS Sports app on the Roku, Apple TV, Fire TV, or most connected TVs. You'll see us, and you'll be a smarter sports fan for it.
How many games are going to win this fall?
The Missouri Tigers over-under win total set at 7.0 at the Caesars Sportsbook, over at -130, under at +110. The non-con fire up chips, Central Michigan, Southeastern Missouri State at Boston College and North Texas. The West draw, Texas A&M will be coming to Columbia, and then the rivalry game against Arkansas, that one will be on the road. Alpha Nerd had a pretty exciting first year, seems to have his quarterback in Connor Bazelak. So, as we're trying to position how we think the SEC East is going to be, I'm curious to hear how you think Missouri's conference record will turn out and how that might influence your pick. So where are we at with Missouri?
Are we going to be in like a promo video again, like a hype video for Mizzou this season? Maybe we will be. I'm going over. I look at this team and kind of what you were talking about when we were talking about Kentucky, Danny. Like, it's Georgia and Florida at the top of the division. And then after that, I think that there's a lot of room for all these teams to maneuver. And I look around and I have questions about Kentucky because I'm not 100% sure what that offense is going to look like and where there's going to be an adjustment. I look at Tennessee with a new coach and you worry about there's going to be adjustment. South Carolina, new coach. Vanderbilt, new coach. Like, Missouri is a team that last season gave us reasons to be optimistic about where that program was going, especially considering where we had been feeling about it before the season started. So I look at Mizzou and I think that this is a team that could capitalize on a lot of question marks throughout the rest of that division besides Florida and Georgia again. And I think that Connor Bazelak at quarterback gives them a very solid floor. I thought that he wasn't amazing last year, but for a freshman, I thought he was impressive. I thought he showed good poise, good decision-making, and the kind of stuff that you kind of want to see from a young quarterback. And I think that he has a chance to improve. I think that the receiver position, it's not loaded, but I do think they got Mookie Cooper in, a transfer from Ohio State who's from the St. Louis area. He was one of the higher rated players in his recruiting class, who, as a lot of receivers who end up going to Ohio State find out, there's not an easy path to the playing field. But I think coming back to Mizzou, getting him on the field, I think he's a very talented player, and he's the kind of guy that could do a lot of things for them offensively. I think defensively, they've got a new defensive coordinator this year. It could be different. I think that, one of the things about that Mizzou defense last year is they played a lot of man defense, like a lot of man, much more man than you typically see on a regular basis for most teams. And I wonder if moving more to a balanced approach could help them there, or if maybe it'll hurt, because they play a lot of man, but they weren't terrible at it. But I just think this is a good team that has a chance to take advantage of its schedule too, mostly because I think that Kentucky game on the road is a tough game early, but the rest of it, Central Michigan should be a win. Southeast Missouri should be a win. I think Missouri's better than Boston College, even going on the road. I give them that win. I think Tennessee at home is a win. North Texas at home is a win. The Aggies, no. But Vandy on the road, winnable. Georgia on the road, no chance. South Carolina has to come to Mizzou. Florida has to come to Mizzou. And then Arkansas is your other road game. I could see this team getting to 8 wins pretty, not easily, but very realistically. So I'm on the over here.
I will be joining you on that over. And as I was breaking it down, I was trying to think about Missouri, Kentucky. You know, they're both sitting there in the same kind of area, and you're trying to figure out, I was like, what happened last year? Well, last year, Kentucky went to Missouri as a 3.5 point favorite and got outgained by 276 yards. And it wasn't like it was like a turnover thing. Kentucky turned the ball over once. Missouri didn't turn over the ball at all. But Missouri absolutely kicked Kentucky's ass. And there's a lot of changeover, obviously, that we just discussed with Kentucky earlier in the show. But as we start to see who's got the leg up on another division rival, it's not my only data point there, but it was a data point for me to consider. I've got a lot of excitement in the Connor Bazelak, Eli Drinkwitz, you know, former offensive coordinator, somebody who's great in job interviews and great on the chalkboard, you know, great on all of his pregame calls with the analysts. Everyone loves Eli Drinkwitz, and consider me among the fans of Coach Drink. And I think they bring back a lot at the wide receiver position. Losing Larry Roundtree is probably a little bit more of a name than necessarily like, oh my gosh, how are they going to replace him? We just got used to him because he was around for so long, putting up good, 100-yard games in SEC play. So I think that it could be 4-0 in non-con. I agree that if I'm going to count it, I should probably count it as 3-1 because going to Chestnut Hill could be tricky. I think it's 1-1 versus the West. And I think that their position of advantage against the rest of the division has this going over. I'm not even like considering it push insurance. I think this is an 8-4 team.
Whew, I'm with you. It's making me nervous. I'm very curious to hear where Bud goes on that one too. I agree. Like Chip, I think you just absolutely nailed it with the kind of schedule breakdown, the way the splits fall there, 1-1 versus the West. I think there's a chance they could catch Florida at home late in a game they don't, maybe don't want to be there. You heard my take on Florida. I like Connor Bazelak a lot. You mentioned Roundtree gone, but Tyler Beatty's got a lot of experience, got, over 1,000 yards career rushing. So it's not like a total, freshman coming in there. They've got experience. I think you'll see a big jump to year 1 to year 2 and all the COVID season last year. And they kind of surprised some people, found their quarterback. So I think you'll see another jump in production from Mizzou. So give me the over 2.
I really don't want to bet any of these SC's win totals. I think most of these, like there's not a lot of value because they play, like for the most part, absolute cupcakes in the non-con. And then like you get your games against your really heavy hitters that you're just not going to win. So it's like, hey, can they go 2-2 against these final 4 games, right? There's not that many coin flips for them, but Missouri does have some coin flips. I'm going to go ahead and take the under here for a couple reasons. I feel like last year their win total did not reflect how well they actually played. I'm not going to bet this, just to be clear. Like this is just me picking something for the show. I really like some of the transfer activity they did. The linebacker from Rice ain't bad. Caleb Evans, the corner they got from Tulsa, is actually a really good player. I know a bunch of other coaches were a little kind of envious that they were able to get him. I do think Bazelak's a good QB, and I think Drinkwitz is a really good head coach. I just look at this and I see I don't really like their chances to beat A&M, Florida, or especially Georgia on the road. Tennessee, I have Missouri favored in that game, but not by 10. At Boston College, they're probably a 1-point dog to a 1-point favorite, something in there. Within a field goal either way. At Kentucky, they're a dog. At Arkansas, I actually don't like Arkansas very much this year, but I still think they are a very slight dog at Arky.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're all getting our money back on this one, right? Come Christmas, they'll pay it out and be like, oh, hey, they went 7-5. I just don't want to pay the -130 juice to the over. So go ahead and give me the plus 110 to the under very slightly.
See, you weren't aggressive enough to make a hater highlight reel there. That was very smart.
I don't
listening.
hate this team. I like this team. I just don't like the price.
And we love that they listen because we appreciate all of our listeners. So
before we move on to the next team, though, I want to play a game with you guys because I mentioned earlier how much man defense Mizzou played. I just looked it up. The average defense in FBS last year played man 27% of the time. Does anybody want to guess how often Mizzou played man?
40.
Incorrect.
Oh, wait, what? Run it by me again.
The average FBS defense played man 27% of the time last year on defense. How often was Mizzou in man?
So I think you got all these G5 teams that don't get any athletes on defense that really skew this down, right? Like, because they just can't play man. I don't know. What's the number one team?
Mizzou.
They're the number one team in playing man coverage.
And by the way, the 4 teams that played man the least, all Power 5 teams. But go ahead.
Really?
Yeah. It was Iowa, Iowa State, West Virginia, and Northwestern. They all played man the least often. But here, I'll just instead of wasting time,
60%. I don't know.
Closer
like
than 55%. The average was 27%. Mizzou played in man coverage 68.6% of the time.
Rounded up. Nice.
So 40% above league or country average.
On their schedule, though, who scares you? Like if you're Mizzou and you're lining up in man, I mean, clearly Georgia, Florida, A&M, who I think we would all peg as losses anyway. But anybody else, talent-wise, do they really strike fear in you that they're just going to shred you if you play man? Probably not.
Boston College can chuck it around a lot. If you got the guys to play man, I think that's a good strategy against Tennessee and Arkansas. But they basically run the same offense. And if you play a lot of man and they can find somebody who should not be playing man, we saw it they run that Art Briles system. Like they're so wide out, like they're so spread wide. Tennessee beat them pretty bad last year, right? And try to like that. There's some teams that could hurt them if they decide to play that much man again.
I'd be more. We could see, but I don't think Texas A&M beats you by chucking it down the field and beating you in man coverage. I think Tennessee beats it just by having bigger and better dudes at the line of scrimmage. Not Tennessee. Did I say Tennessee? Texas A&M. Like I'd be more scared of the Boston College angle of that probably than Texas A&M. But I think Texas A&M wins that game anyway, as we mentioned.
I think Chip is mostly right there. I will say, just having watched Jimbo for a while, his teams seem to struggle sometimes against teams that want to play a lot of zone because like they're primarily like a progression system. And so you can kind of game them into some of the check down stuff and then get them into kind of red zone roulette. They don't really push the ball explosively against zone. Against man, they do. They'll post alert cover 4 and stuff like that. But for the most part, you can kind of game them into some of the dumps and stuff and then take your chances in the red zone. The lesser teams that used to play them in man in the SEC would get hit.
Those are the games where the offense is giving the fans like, oh, here we go. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you level up a little bit. Interesting.
Count them out.
Year 1 of Josh Heupel in Knoxville with the Tennessee Volunteers. Over under win total at Caesars Sportsbook set at 6. 6.0. Over at plus 110, minus 130 to the under. The non-con is Bowling Green, Tennessee Tech, Pitt, and South Alabama. The draw from the West includes Ole Miss coming to Neyland Stadium. And on the 3rd Saturday in October, that game against the Crimson Tide will be in Tuscaloosa. So, year 1, we've got a lot of turnover, some stars left, some really important players left. So, the Vols are going to be trying to be really entertaining. We're trying to chuck it around. We're trying to score often. And does this lead to a bowl season? Because if you're taking the over here, even thinking on a push insurance, then you think Tennessee is bowling. Is Tennessee bowling in 2021? And recruiting allegations notwithstanding, I don't know about bowl bans or anything like that. But if, these things have not been decided yet, do you think that Tennessee will be in the postseason this fall?
No. I'll take the under. I just think you look at the mass exodus of quality players. I mean, how hard is it going to be for volunteer fans to watch 2020 just tearing it up for Alabama this year, and to watch their running, like, go watch Oklahoma all year. Like, you're going to see key contributors that were at Tennessee that have left the program. I just think this is going to be one of those wash years for Tennessee. And I think even their fans know it. But we'll see how long that kind of rationale plays out, because I think this will be a bottom out year for Josh Heupel and the Tennessee Volunteers. I think it's going to be a rough one. So I'm going to take the under. I think quarterback's going to be a massive problem too. I just don't like, for what they want to do, I don't know if they have the right guys, plural, because it's a crowded quarterback room, to execute the offense they want to run.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that they could get to a bowl. I mean, the total's at 6. I think they do go bowling just barely. But if I have to bet one side here, I'm going to take the under before I take the over. And kind of like what you just mentioned, Eddie, for me, it comes down to the quarterback situation. Do we know who the starter is? Has there been any inkling? I know there's Milton. I know there's Harrison Bailey. I know there's Hendon Hooker. It's just none of these guys really give me a ton of confidence whoever wins the job. Like, I was very high on Joe Milton at Michigan going into last season. And maybe just with the COVID year and everything, his play was a result of, like, just messed up practice situations and all that kind of stuff. And maybe with a full off season to prepare for the season, he's able to live up to the, some of the potential that I see in him. But until he does it, it's hard for me to have faith in it. So when I look at the schedule and I look at this team and I look at the expectations for them, I just feel like 6-6, 5-7 is where Tennessee is destined to be in 2021.
Under. I've got Pitt as a loss. So you got 3 non-con wins and feel real good about yourself. That'll be awesome. Love to see Bowling Green on that schedule. I think Ole Miss and at Alabama are both losses. So can you beat 3 division opponents? I don't know. And if my answer is I don't know about 3, then I should not feel confident about beating 4 division opponents. And the total lack of confidence in Tennessee getting 4 wins against SEC East teams is what has me feeling pretty good about going under here. Though I agree that a 6-6 season, I think, should be celebrated, and a 5-7 season probably shouldn't be the markings that everything is going horribly. Now, if the bottom falls out, now we got some real concerns, but it feels like a high number for everything that has gone on from a personnel perspective, from the changeover at head coach. I think that 5-7 much more likely than 7-5. I'm also on the under.
So you guys just laid out all the reasons why I bet this under in May, and I will do it again. It is absolutely under for me. Now, I actually have reasonable confidence that they're going to get okay quarterback play, just because of the number of names they have in that room. And this is a very QB friendly system. We see guys go there. Look at Kendall Briles has gone twice and installed it both at FSU and Arkansas, and it was very much workable in week 1. They put up points immediately. Joe Milton, I have accuracy concerns about him. I have since I've seen him play a whole bunch in high school and at Michigan. But it's not crazy to me to think they could make a bowl with Milton, running around and throwing go routes, which is basically what they ask him to do, because they're spread so wide in this veer and shoot stuff. Maybe it's Hendon Hooker, maybe Bailey. We know Brian Maurer left the team, but I do have some real concerns here elsewhere. They've already had some key offensive line injuries so far in the fall. That's a spot where they were already thin, so that's not good. They do play some really good defensive lines in some of their quote unquote toss-up games, right? Including Pitt, which I think is problematic for them. I think Pitt will win that game in Neyland. Defensively, man, this got picked over hard. Like, if you were a good player at Tennessee, you kind of transferred out. And I remember going through their roster and just crossing off guys who had left, and that's a whole lot of red ink. Their secondary also last year was not very good, and that's like the one part of this defense that returns the most. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, they were 125th, I think, in passing success rate allowed. So that ain't great. I just, can they make a bowl? Yeah. Do I think 5-7 is a lot more likely than 7-5? I do. I think the proper price for this is more like $1.60. So at $1.40, it's definitely a bet for me.
How many games are going to win this fall?
A little bit of late news for the South Carolina win total, as we've got an injury for presumed starter Luke Doty. The win total at 3.5, as I pulled it from the Caesar Sportsbook, with the over at -165, the under at +145. Non-conference includes Eastern Illinois. You go to Greenville to play ECU, Troy at home, and Clemson at home. The draw from the West to College Station to play Texas A&M and Auburn at home. First years are hard. Shane Beamer's a really, really nice guy. I mean, he is just a really nice guy, which is going to make it really easier when this team goes 3-9. I am sitting on the under, and there are a few games that I can identify that could go the other way, but my general confidence in this South Carolina team can best be expressed that I look at ECU and Troy and think those are both games they could lose. I don't think they'll lose, but if they end up going 2-2, 1-3 in the non-con, I wouldn't be totally surprised. And I do not find many teams in conference play where I think that they're going to have a definite advantage. So I think that when I get to 3-9, it obviously includes more of that at ECU Troy situation, but I'm on the under.
The Doty thing pisses me off. I mean, it really sucks. This is one that I bet the over pretty hard on back in May. I got it at -$1.30, -$1.35. Now you got to lay $1.65, and the starting quarterback is hurt. Foot sprain, some ligament stuff. Probably, a month, which means that East Carolina game is game. They're absolutely not locks to beat East Carolina. I think this will be the best East Carolina team we've seen in a while. The Troy game is also not a lock. I think Troy is an improved football team. If you listen to the last episode where we gave out Troy as a team to take over, Kentucky at home, certainly winnable. At Tennessee, kind of coin flippy, but I do have Tennessee slightly favored in that. For the show, I guess at that price.
Are you going to stick with it? Are you going to stick with it?
Well, the thing is, I'm absolutely going to, as soon as we got this show, and we're not supposed to do this anymore according to the iTunes reviews, there's a 4 + 115 to the under that I'm going to go out and hit, and then hope they land on 4. And so I win my over 3.5, and I push my 4. But I'm too exposed on this over right now, so I need to kind of unload some risk. I just don't I think they're good along the lines of scrimmage, actually, which is kind of surprising for a team like South Carolina. But there's a lot of tricky games here that I don't really love them in now if they don't have, can Doty run around? That's a big part of his game, is his mobility. I'm going to stick with the over 3.5 because I think he'll be back. But damn, man, I'm saying that there's no way in hell I would bet over 3.5 right now at this price. I also don't want the under.
I'm going over. I understand where the ECU and the Troy. I do think that those aren't gimmies by any means, at least not in the traditional sense that you would think an SEC team playing East Carolina and Troy should be wins. But I do think they're going to win those games more often than not, though I do agree with you. But the Doty thing really kind of they're going to beat, or they should beat Eastern Illinois with or without Doty. But the road trip to ECU now with the Doty question, if he plays, I think they win that game. If he's limited or he's not even back yet, that game becomes a lot trickier to me. But I kind of agree with you as far as the trenches. I think this team is good on the offensive line. I think the front seven, they're good in the defensive line, and they've got a lot of experience in the front seven of that defense. The secondary is going to, I'm not super confident in, but I do think they can win their 3 non-conference games. And then the question becomes can you nip one in conference play? And I do see some opportunities to do that. Kentucky at home is winnable. Vandy at home is winnable. Tennessee on the road, it's winnable. There are 3 games that I look at in the conference where I say this team can get one of those. I don't think they're going to be good team. I don't think they're going to really flirt with a bowl game, but I think they can get to 4 wins. So I'm going to go over.
I'm going to go over too. I think you have a pretty safe floor, which sounds kind of crazy, but I think you got to remember too, like last year was COVID, right? It was bad. I think this is one of those teams that threw in the towel. Coach gets fired, next day, a couple players opt out. Like that's a mentality that creeps in, and clearly it was just headed the wrong direction. But before that, Will Muschamp's worst year was 4 wins the year before. They're typically, 5, 6, and then before that, they had the program rolling. I still think they'll be able to lean on the East Carolina, the Troy, the Sun Belt teams. I just feel like I'm with Tom's thinking of they're going to get 3 non-cons, and then Vanderbilt, who we're going to discuss, can they sneak out one other surprising win? Like I wouldn't be shocked if they beat, again, it kind of comes back to the parity that's in there. Would you be surprised if they beat Kentucky? Yeah, you probably wouldn't pick it, but I don't think it would be shocking, or Mizzou or Tennessee. So like I think
Auburn.
I mean, seriously, like there would be another win that's in there that you wouldn't be floored by. So I think this is one of those things. Again, Georgia, I'm looking to sell kind of high. I think this is the time to buy South Carolina when the people have just kind of thrown them out with the garbage. And I think they'll be better than they were last year. I don't think they're going to be great, but I feel like 4 wins is kind of where I expect them to be. And I think 5th would kind of be where I would lean as opposed to a 3-9.
They could look really smart for taking Jason Brown from St. Bonaventure, or excuse me, from St. Francis, the QB transfer, as opposed to having to start a true freshman.
Not the coach from Last Chance U.
Yes, correct. Also, there's this pass rusher they got from Georgia State, a dude who's bulked up a ton. I think he was a safety coming out of high school. His name is Jordan Strachan, and like he's been killing it for them so far in camp. So I'm pretty excited to see them.
When you talk about how they are on the defensive front, do we attribute that like as he's on the way out? Is that like the Muschamp effect? Like, congratulations, you took over a roster that's been coached and developed by Coach Boom, which means that the players that are still there are going to be able to have a somewhat high floor, especially defensively up front.
Possibly. I also think they got like a lot of seniors on that front 7, which I think is big for them when it comes to some of those games that are more winnable than not.
Count them up!
And we bring the SEC East to a close with Clark Lee and the Vanderbilt Commodores. Over-under win total set at 3.0 at the Caesar Sportsbook. Over -140, the under +120. Non-conference has East Tennessee State, UConn, and Stanford at home, and then a road trip to face Steve Adazio and Colorado State. The draw from the West Division is both Mississippis. You go to Ole Miss, and you welcome Mississippi State to Nashville. So as Barton Simmons has his eyes on the present and on the future and on roster management and roster construction, just being that Swiss Army knife, that sounding board for the building of this program, just a couple of NBA boys, Nashville natives, building up the Commodores. Does year 1 start with less than 3 wins, 3 wins, more than 3 wins? What are we doing with the over-under win total?
It's an over for me.
Yes.
So they were 120th in SP Plus last year. Remember, there were only 127 teams who played because New Mexico State, UConn, and Old Dominion opted out last year. So they were 7 from the worst team in FBS last year. They were not competitive really in any game. Like the Mississippi State game was close, but like they were very lucky to be in that.
They had 5 turnovers in that game.
Yeah, and like their post-game win expectancy was 18%. It is the only game in which they had a double-digit post-game win expectancy.
Oh, no,
there are others where
they got 5 turnovers. My fault on that one.
Oh, excuse me. Yes. A lot of weird COVID stuff last year. I just think that what's the win total here? 3?
3.
Yeah. So again, I think this is a relatively. Is anybody going to make a case for going under 3? Because I don't see it. Like East Tennessee State and UConn should be wins. I think those are the only 2 games in which they're favored. However, I do believe that they have reasonable chances to win. Like they're not going to be 40-point dogs at Colorado State, at South Carolina, Stanford, Missouri and Kentucky both come to Nashville, as does Mississippi State, which is helpful. They get at Florida, at Ole Miss, those aren't winnable. Georgia's not winnable. At Tennessee is probably not winnable. But I need to get 2 of Colorado State, South Carolina, Stanford, Missouri, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Tennessee. This team, it should be improved. I just don't think they go winless in that stretch. And if you're going to take the under, that's what you basically need to think. Or you think they're going to drop one to Etsu or UConn. So go ahead and give me the over.
I think they could go 4-0 non-con. Over. Like they could be 4-8 at the end of the season and 0-8 in SEC play. I don't think that's the way it falls. That's not like where I'm hanging my over pick. And I do agree that 3-9 is a potential scenario, but I think that given just sort of like the suit 'em up, like if I'm going to do these kind of adjustments in my head where the numbers don't line up because the numbers hate Vanderbilt, I think that the Stanford Vanderbilt game is one that Vanderbilt's team and Vanderbilt fans should say, we can win this game. We absolutely can win this game. So I am always standing. I'm not always. I am often standing on the opposite side of Colorado State, and I'm with you. UConn and East Tennessee State are the 2 locks. So I'm on the over pretty enthusiastically.
I think we're pushing at a minimum by October 2nd. Like, I think they're beating Eastern Tennessee. I think they're beating UConn. And I think they'll win one of the 2 at Colorado State, Stanford. So I think that by the time, the Georgia game, yeah, they're winning that. No, I think they're probably going to lose Georgia. But by the time they get to that road trip at Florida, that really kicks off the beginning of their SEC schedule for good, I think they've got at least 3 wins. They might have 4 wins by then. And then when you get into that SEC schedule, like you're saying, but like South Carolina on the road is not an impossible game. Mississippi State, Mizzou, Kentucky, 3 consecutive games at home with a bye in between. You can get a win in there. That's very feasible. You get Ole Miss on the road, probably not a win. I just don't know if Vandy's got the offense yet to be able to keep up with Ole Miss like they're going to have to. And then Tennessee on the road, it's a rivalry game. It's not like Vandy hasn't beaten Tennessee recently in games like this where you don't think they should, but they do. So I'm pretty comfortable with this over because, again, I think we're pushing at a minimum by the first weekend in October.
I was just looking up lines to see if I could find them for the Stanford game. And I saw Vanderbilt was a 1.5 point favorite. I was like, ooh, where's that one? And it was the baseball College World Series line. That was an old one. So, but I think that game will be one of the more fascinating games here for their season. Cause I do think they start off 2-0. I think the UConn game is a win. So there's 3. I think this one could be the one that puts you for the over. There's no way I'm going to make it on some Vanderbilt promotional highlight video and take the under because our guy Barton would say, go check them out, see if they're fading us, see what's happening. There's no way. I'm buying into the Clark Lee regime and the new investment and the football mentality that they're selling at Vanderbilt. So I don't know. I do think it comes down to the Stanford game, but it's in Nashville. I think this will be –
oh, Stanford's a body clock all-star team. I mean, how many times have we at the end of the season been like, oh, that didn't count. It was 10 a.m. for the Stanford team. We need to now factor that in as a reason to bet against Stanford.
Yes. So I'll take the over as well.
Yeah, that's one thing, Barton. I don't know what kind of power you have there, but that's an 8 p.m. Eastern start or 7 p.m. local start. You guys need to get that earlier in the day. That should be 11 a.m. Nashville time.
It's okay because I'm sure that David Shaw has already changed up their sleeping patterns or whatever and whatever sports science they've got right there. So there you go, Barton. You've allowed us to continue to use your voice in the intro, and we've got you with 4 piping hot overs here in the SEC East win totals episode. You can follow him on Twitter at Tom Fernelli. You can follow him at Bud Elliott 3. You can follow him at Danny Cannell. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.